All right, everybody. Good evening. It's welcome to the 10-4 Tavern. Tommy Joyce, Pete Forcelli here. Tonight we have two very special guests. We have former Deputy Commissioner of Operations of the NYPD and former Superintendent, Chicago Police Department, former Director of the Newark Police Department, Garry McCarthy, an old friend. We'll get to Garry in a minute, but today is a really important day for me. So I'm just going to take the floor right now, and then we'll get to Pete and Garry in a second, and then I'll introduce Miss Sharon Sims. As everyone knows, most people know who the audience, I am a former commanding officer of the cold case squad in the New York City Police Department. I ran a detective squad in the 79th Precinct, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. I was a sergeant in the Crown Heights section. I was a detective in the NYPD in transit, an investigator. I never attained the rank of detective. I got promoted to sergeant in advance of that. But it was always my dream to be in investigations. And I've been retired almost 20 years now, and everywhere I go, everywhere I work, someone says to me, "Hey, Tommy, you were in cold case, you worked all these homicides. What's the case that gnaws at you? What's the case that you always wish was solved?" And although statistically and administratively this case was solved, we did not obtain a conviction. After 2 mistrials and an acquittal, this person who was arrested was ultimately, I believe, Ms. Sims, and you can speak to it, was found guilty in a civil court for wrongful death. Yes. However, the criminal conviction did not come. Well, that case was a beautiful young girl by the name of Ashley Sims, age 13 years of age, and she died in an arson for profit murder case at 27 Brevoort Place 25 years ago today. And coincidentally, our guest today, Deputy Commissioner at the time, Garry McCarthy, was the executive in the New York City Police Department that when I went and stood at the podium at CompStat, and for all of those of you who don't know what CompStat is, it's the accountability and responsibility executive leadership approach towards making sure all operations throughout the police department, patrol, narcotics, investigations, and all the support units are all doing their job to the best of their ability. I think it's a wonderful program. It may have lost its way from time to time. We'll get into that with Garry later, but I am a staunch supporter of CompStat. That being said, it was Garry who held my office responsible for the investigation of Ashley Sims in July 22nd, 2000 in the confines of the 79th Precinct. So with that, I just want to tell you that I had never met Miss Sims before during the homicide case. I always liaisoned with Carolyn Sims, Miss Sims's sister.
Yes.
And it was about 10 years ago on LinkedIn of all places that I received a direct message from Miss Sims, and she said, "Are you the Tommy Joyce that worked in the 79th Precinct in 2000? And I said, "Yes." So we've been talking on and off for about, give or take, 8 or 9, 10 years or so. And then most recently, I had noticed that this anniversary was coming up, and I reached out to Miss Sims and asked her if she could, if she would want to tell her story. I think she's been on a long journey and she's ready to tell that story. So with that, I'm going to let them just everyone say hi while I get the case up, and then we'll get going. So go ahead, go around the room. Pete, if you want to just open up, and then Garry, and then we'll go to Miss Sims.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Good to be here. I'm logging in from out of the country. I'm happy everything's working okay, Tommy. As you know, I'm sitting in a hotel room, not normally where I'm logging into the tavern. But yeah, it's an honor to be here with Garry, who I knew when he was a patrol sergeant in anti-crime, actually in the 4-3, back in the days of cops being cops. And it's the first time I'm meeting Miss Sims. I know you spoke very highly of her to me, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say today.
Garry, it's up to you.
So I'm Garry McCarthy. I'm also coming to you from out of the country. I'm in the People's Republic of Chicago right now, and it's a different world, trust me. It's not the New York that I grew up in the Bronx for sure, but we'll get into that a little bit more. All my friends across the country ask me, what is it about Chicago that is messing everything up? And it's really simple, Chicago politics. The decisions that they make based upon events that occur just don't match up with fixing problems. It's that simple. So we'll get into that during the course of the event. I really like to hear about Miss Sims and her daughter, quite frankly.
Yeah.
All right,
Hello.
Ms. Sims, just say hi to everybody, and then we'll get going into your
Hi,
story.
I'm Sharon Sims, the mother of Ashley Sims. I'm still in Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn is not the same as it used to be either. Everything has changed so much. So, yeah.
Okay, so a little bit of background since this is a police-related show, but then we wanted to show who the victims are and why the police do what they do. So this is the unusual report that was submitted on the night of the incident that happened at 27 Brevoort Place. It's on the border of the 79th precinct and 77th precinct, right off Atlantic Avenue as it gets down towards the north end of Brooklyn. These are brownstone houses. They probably were single-family homes 75, 100 years ago. They've been converted to multiple dwellings. And at this time, this was a Section 8 home that had multiple families living in there, and they were on public assistance. It is our theory that Antonio Casanova, who's ultimately the perpetrator, was having problems evicting the tenants and figured the only way he could get them out was to burn them out. What a terrible, horrific, evil thing to do. So with that, this was Ashley. And although Diane Carter was also injured and she was listed as likely to die at that time, she was very seriously injured. And I believe there were at least 11 or 12 other people who had serious injuries ranging from smoke inhalation and fire burns to also broken bones and serious physical injuries due to jumping out of the window.
Yeah.
Some newspaper articles at the time. And to make matters even worse, not only was this an intentional act committed by a very evil person, but the city failed inspections on the fire suppression systems at that time. So it made the fire even worse. And if I remember correctly, the fire marshals in our arson and explosion squad informed us at the time that this was done by a probable amateur, because a professional arsonist would know to dilute gasoline and kerosene together, because the gasoline is more volatile and then the kerosene would burn hotter and longer and cause more damage. And again, for all you arson and explosion and ATF guys, Pete, don't hold me to that. I'm recalling a 25-year memory here in conversations with the ATF and the arson and explosion squad. However, that also helped us build towards looking at the amateur that he was, Antonio Casanova. And then in February of 2001, Antonio Casanova was arrested as he took a flight from the Dominican Republic and landed in Miami. And we had made a case and got an indictment against him at that time. And we were just waiting for him to come back to the United States. And we got him as he was landing in Miami in February of 2001. So that's the short version of this case. I'm going to turn it over to Miss Sims right now and let her tell you about her journey real quick. And then she wrote a book, and there's a foundation for Ashley that we'll just talk about. And then we'll get into the 10-4 Tavern.
Thank you, Lieutenant Joyce. I am so happy to be a guest on your podcast tonight. I can't believe it's been 25 years. I just saw someone in the grocery store a few hours earlier, and she was like, "It's been that long?" I was like, yes, 25 years. And believe me, first of all, I would like to thank you and the other guys that did so much for this case. We never had to ask you for any information. You kept us informed on each and everything that you guys were doing, and we so much appreciate that, you know? Yeah.
So I want to give a shout out right now. The two assigned detectives, although there were many, was Detective Patrick Valentino from the 79th Precinct Detective Squad and Detective Frankie Gutierrez from the Brooklyn North Homicide Squad.
Most definitely.
Those were the two primaries, but dozens and dozens of detectives pitched in.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You know, that night it was crazy, the whole thing. It was so unexpected because, you know, I never let her, she had gone to spend the night there like once before. I was very protective of my daughter. And this night she begged and she begged and she wanted to go to stay the night. And I was like, I finally said yes. And this is the night that this happens. I was so protective of her. And I felt so guilty for so long for saying yes. You know, I had to live with that guilt for years. And I struggled after that, you know, I just like, oh, I just felt like I was to blame for that, you know, even though I didn't cause it, I felt like I was to blame because I should have never let her go. And so I struggled for years. I had to see psychiatrists, therapists, which I still do have a psychiatrist and a therapist until this day, you know. That helped a lot because the medication, I was not trying to do that like that. So I have a therapist until this day, which really helps me a lot. But what really helps me is me giving my life back to God and praying and stuff like that because I was brought up in the church, you know, so I knew God. God was not a stranger to me, you know. I even went through a time where I was doing like worldly things, like involved in crimes and stuff like that because I was just like, I was upset with the world. I was mad, not with you guys, but I was really upset with the jury. Lieutenant Joyce, I just could not understand, like they couldn't see what we saw. I just couldn't understand that. Even though we didn't have an eyewitness, I just felt like there was enough circumstantial evidence where we should have gotten convicted. You know, that's what I always thought. I just could not understand that. So I was really mad at the jury. I'm like, oh my God, if they could just feel the pain that I felt for 5 minutes, then they would have changed their mind. So,
Yeah.
but I struggle. I do, but I've gotten my life back together and on track now. I'm a volunteer for Hope for New York. You know, their organization, a nonprofit that has like 60 different nonprofits up under them and stuff like that. I volunteer. I'm a leader and usher, a leader of the ushers and greeter at my church. I've been there for about 8 years. So, you know, I have the foundation, the Ashley Sims Foundation in her name. This book that I wrote, Sometimes I Look Just Like You. I titled this book this because my entire life, many decades, you know, at one time, which you didn't know, before I met you, before my daughter's case came about, I was homeless. I was addicted to drugs, but that's way before I met you. I cleaned my life up before that. And then after I cleaned up and after her death, I went back to the streets, not doing drugs, but like doing crimes, you know? And I was just like, I was angry. I was angry for you because you guys did so much. And I'm like, why can't they see what we saw? I couldn't understand it. I just could not comprehend that, you know? And we talk about you and the other two guys right now, my family and myself. We appreciate you guys so much. And I have a son. So my son was born here, but he was raised by my parents. But my son is up here now. He's in Pennsylvania right now, but he had a run-in with the law, you know, off and on like that. But he's doing a lot better now. But what I tell him is respect the law, respect the officers. And if you respect them, they're going to respect you. And like I tell everybody, the bad ones are only a few, you know? Yeah.
We talked about that, and we're going to get into that with the commissioner tonight for sure about community relations and how that all stems out. So, Ms. Sims, I just want to point everyone to this book. I'm going to go to the next page and bring up Ashley's foundation. So it's the Ashley Sims Charity Foundation. If you feel inclined to make a donation, please feel free to do so. The AshleySimsCharityFoundation.com. And with that, any other final thoughts, Ms. Sims, about the foundation and the work you guys are doing, and who does the foundation help?
The foundation helped children, period. Anybody that's in like the shelter system, because she was born. She was born when we were in the shelter. Before I moved here, you know, we were in the shelter system because I just want to help any child that I can help. You know, so yes.
Okay, so everybody, we're gonna start pivoting right now. We're gonna final thoughts. Any like to read this comment for you from Al Crow. God bless you, Sharon, for making it through, Your Honor. Beautiful daughter. Can't imagine what you went through. So there's probably there's a bunch here chiming in, mostly getting Gary. Good morning. Hi, everybody. So we're good on that. Ms. Sims, any final thoughts before we leave? And we'll again share the book link and the foundation link at the end.
I just want to say I support the police department so much. Just continue to do the work that all the guys do, and respect them. I try to tell everybody that I teach my son that respect them and they will respect you, and we need you. And as far as that defunding the police, that's crazy. That's just ridiculous. So, yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, with that, Ms. Sims, thanks for jumping on today. I know it's a very difficult day for you, 25
Thank
years.
you for having me, Lieutenant Joyce. Thank you for having me so much. We really appreciate it.
God bless you. It's an honor to meet you.
Thank you, guys. An honor to meet you guys also. Okay. Have a blessed night.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to Ms. Sims' story. Like I said, this is the one case that gnaws at me. The fact that we did not get a conviction, I'd love to go deep into it. It's a whole episode, actually, one day. 2 mistrials and an acquittal, and I know exactly what happened, but the details are long and drawn out, so we'll do that maybe another day. So let's get into it. Let's go to, let's bring this up. So we got Garry McCarthy, Superintendent, Chicago PD, Deputy Commissioner, NYPD Operations, Director in Newark. Quite a stellar career, Garry. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. You good, Garry? You have sound?
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
And welcome, Pete. So listen, bellying up to the bar at the Tavern. What do we got going on?
Tommy?
Well, Pete, you're drinking tequila. Is that what I'm hearing?
I am south of the border in an undisclosed location, and I am drinking a Herradura Silver in honor of where I'm at. So, yes, sir. Calling in from a hotel room for the first time.
All right. So when Garry asked, what are we doing? What's the theme? I was like, just a bunch of lawmen, or in other cases, some days law women, policemen, policewomen, bellying up to the bar and having a cocktail. So we invited Garry to have a drink with us as well. So Garry, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking beer. I generally enjoy beer, but yeah, I figured take it easy, just have a beer or two, get through a couple of stories, and move on.
Yeah, for sure. Although we have the Tavern theme, we do encourage responsible drinking. We tell these guys never get their DWIs. There's Uber. There's always a phone call. Drink responsibly, act professionally as well. But that doesn't mean we can't politely and professionally tell some stories and have a cocktail or two while we're doing it. So with that, Garry McCarthy. I know Garry probably 27 years when you first in fact, the first time I met you when you became the Deputy Commissioner of Operations. So that was in 2000, right? January 2000, is that about right?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, my last day in uniform in the NYPD was Y2K. I was in the 7-0 at the time. And I was, if I remember correctly, I think Y2K landed on a Saturday. And naturally, everybody's working. It's 12 o'clock, and it sounds like Beirut on Flatbush Avenue.
Yep.
And I decided everybody just into the station house and chill out for a little bit. Hopefully they run out of ammunition and we could go back on patrol. And
well, fast forward to all these years later, and here you are on Fox News with Martha McCallum and the DNC 2024 in Chicago. Quite a career, Garry. Quite a ride. What did you call your career?
Yeah, what was that time? I missed it.
What did you call your career this afternoon? You made a reference.
I always say that I've lived a Forrest Gump type existence in that I don't make decisions. Things just keep happening to me. I will tell you one decision I did make in my career, and it's actually a pretty funny story. When I was getting out of training, I had a friend of mine from college whose dad was a captain in the NYPD, and he said, Garry, when you're getting out of your training, give me a call. My dad says he could probably get you to whatever precinct you want to go to. And I said, okay, fine. So I give him a call. He said, Howie, I want to go to the 4th, 6th precinct in the Bronx. And he said, okay, I got it, 4th, 6th. He calls me back 20 minutes later, and And he says, "Did you say 4'6"? I said, "Yeah." He says, "My father wants to know if you actually took the psychological exam, because nobody asks to go to the 4'6". All you got to do is screw up and you end up there." And I got to tell you, it was the one and only decision I made in my police career. And at the end of the day, it was the best one that I could have made, because I threw myself into being a police officer and I learned it from the bottom up. You know, if you go to a place that's not that busy and then you become a boss and you end up in a busier place, there's going to be an intimidation factor. And, you know, quite frankly, I was very, very comfortable in just about any environment we were in. And you know the crises that we run into in policing, and God knows there was a lot of them. And I just feel like that trained me for the rest of my career.
That explains a lot to me, Garry, because I remember when we first met, you were the anti-crime sergeant in the 43rd Precinct. I was a housing cop in PSA 8, sometimes
Right.
plain clothes. And I was telling Tommy before you joined us today, man, one of the things I always respected about you is I remember you back in the days, you had the Army M65 green field jacket, always wore the sweatshirt. You were out there going hands-on with your people, doing police work, not just being a boss. The fact that you cut your teeth in the 4'6", that explains a lot. But yeah, I remember you back in the days. We're always out there. We ran into the same folks at Monroe houses, Soundview houses. You were always out there being a cop, which I respected.
Yeah, and you know, that was so much fun, being in charge of 6 go-getters, just going out there and grabbing guns and robbery patterns, locking up people. Parkchester, we were getting robbery patterns of like 20 and 30 robberies at a time, because people were trapped there from you know, elderly people, and they were just getting whacked left and right. So it was very gratifying. And then, you know, my division commander, we had divisions back then, right? My division commander liked me because I was active, like you were saying. And he says to me, "You're on the lieutenant's list." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Do you want to stay in the Bronx?" I said, "Absolutely, I want to stay in the Bronx." Well, that didn't mean that I wanted to go to the 4-4, but that's what happened. And I went to the 4-4 at a time when it was just, you can't make up the stories. Any cop can write a book. Any cop can write a book. But the things that I experienced there were just beyond. We had 13 police-related shootouts in my first 11 months there. It got to the point where it was just reload and resume. And if you weren't working, you might not even know what happened, that somebody got into a shootout. It was just, you know, 89 to 92 in the 4-4 was a pretty busy place to be, let's put it that way. Great cops. As a matter of fact, when I became deputy commissioner, my office was probably about 3/4 of people from the 4-4 who I used to work with. I brought them all down. I was like the commissioner of last resort, I think, and trying to keep these people afloat all at the same time.
Yeah, that was a great place to learn how to be a cop. I refer to it as the golden age of policing.
Yeah, well, I like to say that when I went on the job in 81, they were happy if you showed up for work, and if you were sober, it was better, right? and then the other thing was, you know, I remember some unbelievable old timers, Vietnam veterans, because there was a lot of them around at that point, and that's where we really learned about tactics. You learn stuff in the police academy, but when you're on the street, you learn things like you got to look at their hands, don't take your eyes off of their hands, all sorts of things that you do second nature, because it's, you know, when I counted, I think there was probably about 6 or 7 times that I could have been shot by cops. One in particular where it was just unbelievable. 6 guys around the car shooting into a car. And I was at the back corner of it. I just hit the ground, and, you know, just dangerous situations. And I wouldn't change a thing about it. My generation, you know, everybody talks about what Giuliani and Bratton did when they came in, right? How New York City turned around. But the other thing that they don't give any credit for was my generation got very fortunate. We hit a sergeant, lieutenant, and captain's test consecutively. So if you hit the top of the sergeant's test, you got to take the lieutenant's test. Yeah, that's Tom Patel and Joe D'Amico. Two great friends of mine who we came up together. Joe D'Amico was the other anti-crime sergeant in the 4-3.
Right.
He used to cover for me so I could go to football practice. We'd switch tours all the time. But yeah, two great friends of mine, and they got the top of sergeant, lieutenant, and captain's list when they came in. And those are the people who ended up stepping up. I'm going to guess that out of the top 100 on my captain's list, there had to be about 70 of them made chief at some point. Some really talented people. I remember an old timer said, I was doing well in the rat race until they brought in faster rats. And that was us. So, and they made it into a meritocracy. The politics kind of went out the window. And if you were a hard worker and you were excelling, you were going to advance. It was really that simple. And a lot of smart, hardworking police officers did exactly that.
Yeah, I don't think people realize, at least outside of New York, how in many ways, like you pointed out, we were kind of like self-taught. We learned from the people around us. I remember when I first went into Bronx homicide, we'd kick in doors and run around with our guns screaming, police don't move, till we either found the guy or got tired of saying, police don't move. We never received any tactical training back then. It didn't come till much later, towards the end of my career, where now they get a ton of it. But yeah, you're right. We learned from the people in the field that went before us, not so much from the academy. You learn law and police science and all the little stuff in the academy, but how to be a cop, we learned in the street.
Yeah, and the other thing is, you learn from the good bosses and the bad bosses too. You can learn just as much from a bad boss as a good boss.
Yep.
You learn what not to do and what to actually do at the same time. And, I studied leadership and I try to emulate it. And it all started for me. My dad was a World War II Marine. And he was so smart. He joined the Marine Corps Reserve in 1940. Got activated 13 months before Pearl Harbor, was a machine gunner at American Samoa, Guadalcanal, New Guinea, New Britain, Iwo Jima, and the occupation of Japan. And then he came back home and became a police officer. But I was raised learning about leadership because my dad would talk to us about the fact that whenever there were two Marines together, because one was in charge. And probably would have been easier to go into the Marine Corps than get raised by Jim McCarthy, but I learned a lot from him. Guys like Chesty Puller and John Basilone, if you know anything about Marine Corps history, Chesty Puller was his battalion commander in the 7th Regiment, 5 Navy Crosses, and John Basilone was his platoon sergeant, got the Medal of Honor on the next gun over for my dad on Guadalcanal.
Wow.
So, these are legends in the Marine Corps, and he emulated them. And I actually had the crazy experience of watching a documentary on Iwo Jima, and it was a newly formed division, the 5th Marine Division. And my dad was one of the 200 or so veterans who got sprinkled into that newly formed division. And one of these guys told a story about my dad, named him by name and picture. And from that point, this was in 1995, I was able to reach out to people who were on Iwo Jima with my dad. And they told me the most amazing stories where in the middle of a firefight, he gets up and lights a cigarette and walks around and tells them, you're firing high to the right. Watch the apertures, low to the left. Just crazy stuff like that.
Wow.
So, leadership is from the front. It's not go do that. It's come with me. And I always tried to do that. I still try to do that today. Even the sleepy little town of Springs, when something happens, I jump right in. I kind of get excited because it's not as exciting as doing Chicago, Newark, or New York. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Wow.
All right. So Gary, after the 4-3 and anti-crime, I guess you get promoted to lieutenant from there.
Yeah, and I went to the 4-4 for 3 years, and then Pat Harnett happened to be my CO in the 4-3 when I was there. Yeah. Pat Harnett took over emergency service, and he brought me out to emergency service, the best job I ever had in my life, citywide supervisor as a lieutenant. And I know that Tony Simonetti just passed away, but I met Tony Simonetti for the first time when I was a lieutenant in emergency service. It was the 1990, I don't know if it was a DNC or an RNC, I forget. but there was a group of protesters who locked themselves together in those sleeping dragon things in the basement of a fertility place. And they didn't realize that it was closed. And it was a super hot July afternoon. And I get there, and the deputy inspector who's running the operation, I said, what do you want us to do, boss? He says, well, they're going to go get the key and cut everybody loose. And I said, well, boss, but if you let them leave, they're going to go sit down in the middle of Times Square and block traffic for 2 hours. We got them in an air-conditioned spot here. Let's cut the sleeping dragons and lock everybody up, and we eliminate the problem. And he says, well, I've been working all night and I'm tired, and that's what we're going to do. I made the decision. So, okay, boss, no problem. And, one of my cops naturally didn't accept that. That's a good answer. And he's like, but boss, if we do that, then blah, blah, blah. The inspector jumped all over the cop. I mean, really shit on him hard. And I looked at him like, come on, dude. Let's get out of here. Go in the hallway. Tony Simonetti was the duty chief at the time, citywide. And he shows up to the job. And he says to me now, not the inspector. He says, Lieutenant, what do we got here? Because in ESU, you kind of had that, because you had the specialized training and the expertise, they expected something more from you than they did some of the higher ranking bosses. And he said, what do you got, Lou? And I said, well, they got the sleeping dragons here. And the boss wants to let these guys unlock themselves and leave. He says, what? He says, let them unlock themselves and leave. If they unlock themselves and leave, then they're going to go sit in the middle of Times Square. They're going to block traffic for 2 days and so on and so forth. Bullshit. Cut the sleeping dragons, lock all of these guys up. You should have seen the look on my cop's face. He was just in heaven. And that's the first time I met Tony Simonetti. Later on, when I was a captain, I ran into him a couple of times when he was first deputy. But he remembered that scenario, and he always treated me well. God bless him. He was a good guy.
Yes, let's just call it out. Tony Simonetti, retired first deputy commissioner of the New York City Police Department, died yesterday, July 21st, 2025. So rest in peace, Commissioner. Appreciate that. So good story, Gary. Thanks for sharing that. We got a couple of, let me see how this is. Chief D'Amico was my chief when he was a cadet, real-time crime unit. Drove him twice. Good man from Marlin, the fire detective. Tell Gary, Chief D'Amico, hello from me. I want to know what Gary thinks of what's going on in the NYPD now, as if he was involved with promotions. Yeah, we'll maybe get into that later in a little bit. And then Terry Murnane, Buddy Murnane's brother, again, another call out, because I know he's one of Pete's mentors. And you might remember Terry, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Hit the like, share, and subscribe button, everybody. Appreciate it. And Doreen McCormick, RIP for the Commissioner. So let's get back to it. So you make lieutenant, ESU, you're loving life, everything is great, and then you do that silly thing and take a captain's exam. Yeah,
well, I took it when I was in the 4-4, to be fair, when I took the test.
Oh, okay.
And being a desk officer in the 4-4 is like being a fire hydrant in a dog pound, right? And, you're in charge of everything, but you're not having any fun, and you're just logging things and dealing with crisis left and right. I still don't understand how the desk officer was still in charge of patrol, even though they weren't on the street, right?
Exactly.
I'm still confused by that. But I took the test. I did well on the test, as did Tommy and Joe and a lot of my friends. And it was an interesting time because it was during the Mullen Commission. And if you remember the story, Ray Kelly was the first deputy at the time. And Ben Ward, I believe, was the commissioner. And he tasked, it wasn't Ben Ward. It was Brown, Commissioner Brown, the guy from Houston.
Lee Brown.
Lee Brown.
Brown tasked Ray Kelly with investigating the circumstances of Michael Dowd and the 7-5 crew from the Mullen Commission. And he wrote this brilliant 200, 300-page document about bifurcated investigations and not talking to each other. And that was the days of the field internal affairs units versus internal affairs. And it turns out that a lot of people in internal affairs weren't, let's put it this way, they didn't want to be on the street, okay? And Ray Kelly writes this report, sends it up to the commissioner. Brown ends up leaving, and Ray Kelly gets and receives his report and says, "This is brilliant, we're gonna do it." And what they did was they tried to infuse internal affairs with a whole bunch of new people, including us newly minted captains. We were made promises. And interestingly, the CEA had just signed a contract where obviously we're not getting paid overtime anymore. I took a $10,000 pay cut by leaving ESU and taking my captain's promotion. But you would get an $1,100 pay raise for the first step. Then you would get a $152 pay raise for each of the next 6 years. And then the seventh step was something like $18,000. So they made us promises that if you give us 2 years in internal affairs, you're going to get a promotable command. So that means you probably bring that time in half, which is a significant pay raise. So a whole bunch of us end up going to internal affairs, myself included. I got to tell you something. It was distasteful, but in some cases, I just can't believe that I saw what I saw. I locked up a ring of cops in a 2-5 who were putting guns to drug dealers' heads and saying, "If you don't give me the money, I'm going to blow your effing brains out." Well, they weren't making arrests. They were stealing their drugs and their money. That's called robbery. And I had no problem locking those guys up. As a matter of fact, I was proud of it. But I did see some bad things that just didn't have to happen, like a beautiful young police officer, female, who alleged that another officer had raped her on a ski trip. Well, it turns out it wasn't rape. It was consensual because her roommate was in the other bed watching this the whole time, trying to cover her head. And she comes back, and her boyfriend in the precinct found out about it. She was like, no, I got raped. I mean, come on. So she had to get fired. And I mean, stuff like that, you don't want to do, but you have to do. Drug use, I had no problem getting rid of people who were using drugs and things like that. But the whole experience kind of opened my eyes to something that I never would have imagined we could have seen. But the incompetence of some of the people who were there was remarkable. I had a lieutenant go out on a surveillance, and he comes back, and I said, "Well, what'd you get?" And he says, "No, I didn't get anything." I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, I was sitting on the block waiting for this officer, and I got double parked." And I said, "Even if that happened, why would you tell me that? Couldn't you come up with a better story?"
Right.
But that was the incompetence, and it was changing a culture is difficult.
Yeah.
But if you can't change the people, you got to change the people.
Yep.
And
That's right.
it was an experience. And then I didn't get a promotable command because now Ray Kelly's out, Bill Bratton's in, John Timoney's the first step. He hates internal affairs. So from being the best and the brightest, they were recruiting to turn the place around. We became a whole bunch of assholes. And eventually Pat Kelleher did the right thing, and I got the 2-0 precinct, where I was never going to get promoted. I knew that, but it was a great neighborhood, but it was boring, quite frankly. I'm in the 4-6, the 4-4, the 7-0, and now I'm in the 2-0 looking at Lincoln Center.
But you probably caught the Philharmonic in the opera, though.
I did. I absolutely did. My kids got to see the winter shows and everything else. It was great.
Yeah.
But
So where's this then?
Now that picture right there is from the 3-3, because from the 2-0 there was a bad police shooting in the 3-3. A kid named Kevin Cedeno was a black kid who 2 white officers were chasing on at midnight. And he had a machete up his sleeve, and when he pulled it out, they thought it was a shotgun, and they shot him in the back. So they decided that they were going to move the CO to save her. Very competent woman, but they were going to move the CO, and they threw me into the deep end. And here's another one of my favorite stories. I'm walking into the 3-3 for my very first day, and I got my stuff over my shoulder and my bag, and Who do I walk into who's walking out but Al Sharpton? Because he's protesting outside the precinct every single day. So I'm like, hey, Rev, how you doing? I'm Garry McCarthy, new CEO. I said, why don't you come in and we'll talk? He said, sure. So I just wave at the desk because they know me. I'm a captain who worked in the borough, right? I go back to the office with Sharpton, and the phone starts ringing. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, I haven't even signed in yet. Nobody knows I'm here. I'm not on the phone. And I'm having this great conversation with Sharpton. Give him my card, cell phone. Rev, if you want to work with me, I'll work with you. This is what I'm all about. We have a great conversation. So eventually, I knock on the door. This young cop opens the door. He's going to say, boss, you got to answer that. That's the chief of patrol. I said, oh, my God. So the phone rings again. I pick it up. And without even getting to say a word, all I hear is, get him the fuck out of there. Just like that. It's like, oh, yeah, sure, boss. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. No, yeah, I'm here. I got it. I'll take care of it. Hang up the phone. I'm like, okay, Rev, we got to go. I got to get to work. Nice talking to you. Let's stay in touch. I walk him out the door, and the cameras go on. And all of a sudden it was, I don't care how many commanders they sent here. We need an African-American here in the 33rd precinct. And I was like, welcome, Garry.
Well, I think that's a foreshadow for you, because I believe you had that conversation most recently on your podcast, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So hold that thought on deciding what kind of cops and what pedigree and what race work where. So we'll get into that in a bit. So I want to bring up a comment here, Garry, and I know this might be the first time you've ever heard this. McCarthy, laugh out loud, might be the most hated guy in the NYPD. First time you ever heard something like that, Garry? How does it?
Yeah, definitely. My retirement dinner was in a telephone booth. You heard that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
1,000 people at Marina Del Rey in a hurricane.
So there's some chatter, right, about stuff and nepotism and how you make your bones in police departments. And I'm gonna give this opportunity. Garry and I have never been at each other's house, but I would consider him a friend through all the years that we've met and showed up. Maybe we ran into each other at a racket, maybe at one of your football games, but not much more than that. However, I believe you could call me and ask for a favor anytime, and do the same for you, which you've done in the past for sure. But I want to tell a story about being the squad commander in the 7-9. George Brown was the chief of detectives. The very first non-fatal shooting I had was a girl by the name of Kristen Prest, May 5th of 1999 in the 7-9 squad. And we had an I-card out for Isaac Lopez. And Isaac Lopez, 4 years later in 2004, shoots an off-duty cop in the 8-1. And then we do the I-card investigation, and we play catch-up on the typing. And you guys thought you caught us, but you didn't, but you kind of did. The address was 390 Nostrand and 390 Gates. And it's the single building that has two doors, one on Nostrand and one on Gates, and they're both 390. And so you guys were like, you guys don't even know what the F you're doing. You got 390 Gates, you got 390 Nostrand, you got 390 Gates, and you got 390 Nostrand. And the win is that you were right. We did play catch up, but you were wrong because you guys didn't know that it was the same building, and that was actually the correct catch up typing. So, but my point is Tommy Joyce could have got his ass handed to him that night, because you did catch us for the catch up, because the 390 address exposed us. And I'm just going to say that every single squad commander and every single precinct commander that I ever watched, at every CompStat that I was ever at, every 6 weeks for 7 straight years, fair guys who were doing their job got treated accordingly. They were passes, and the guys who just constantly showed up, guys and gals, whoever they were, just they got what they deserved. And so if I'm the boss and Pete was a big boss in the ATF, and we'll ask his opinion, if that's what it means to be, if I'm going to be hated for that, there's a job to be done. There's lives to be saved. So
listen, I have no problem with that.
No, I know.
That's why you're never going to make everybody happy. You're never going to make everybody happy. But you know what? You try to treat people fairly. I like to say that I call balls and strikes, right? And I can tell you this. You know what's funny, Tommy? I don't even remember half the things that I did for people that come back to me years later. And I'm going to tell you a story. Somebody who's a very high-ranking guy, was a very high-ranking guy in the NYPD. I called him for something. And he says, you know, I got to tell you something. You did something that I never saw happen before. And I said, what was that? He says, so-and-so got up at CompStat, and apparently they were very good friends. And this guy just couldn't answer any questions. He was just, you know, blank stare and so on and so forth. And there was a promotion ceremony after CompStat. Remember, we would line up for the dais outside the press room, right? And the guy from CompStat happened to come by with the guy who I'm talking to now. I said, come here. I said, you're not going to do that again. I said, the next time Manhattan North is up at CompStat, you're coming to my office the week before, and I am going to personally prepare you for CompStat. I didn't even remember this, Tommy. But you know what? That guy, that training changed everything about the trajectory of that guy's career. And it could have been completely different.
Yeah.
There was only one incident that I remember where I really lost my mind a little bit. And it was a female sergeant from Staten Island Detective Squad who basically is standing there with her hand on her hip, kind of chewing gum and tapping her foot. And she's like, well, let me explain this to you, Commissioner. And I said, no, let me explain this to you. Take your stuff, go back to Staten Island. And by the time she got there, she was transferred. Yep. But that, you know, that was few and far between, but that was about disrespect.
Yep.
Don't forget, I stood at the podium for 5+ years before I sat behind the table.
That's right.
And the 3-3 was no joke. The 7-0 was no joke. And you know, I was doing it in the days of Louis Anemone and Jack Maple, who, when they were done with me, I thought they were going after my family. And they liked me.
Yeah.
They liked me.
Yeah. Well, that's what everyone tells me, you know, like, how long did you go to CompStat? And then I think we went to dinner in Chicago, actually. We did. And then I was talking to some of your people there with Gus and those folks. And they said, oh, did you ever go to CompStat with Garry? What was he like back then? And I go, every 6 weeks, buddy, I got the scars and the marks to prove it. Everything that we got, we deserved. Everything we went through. But I'm going to call out Ron Layson from the Executive Perspective podcast. Rookie captain, my first CompStat, CO at PMI. My CO was at PMI. Commissioner McCarthy crushed me for not having motives. Squad was no help. What precinct was this, Ron? We got to talk to those guys in the squad. Never got short again. So what? You took your lumps, you learned, and you never. I mean, if you're doing a job, I know John Cornicello and I used to be upset when we were supposed to be up and we didn't go. At that, we got to that point.
So here's a story to people. This didn't happen under mine and Espo's watch. And me and Espo did it together for 6 years. I did it for 1 year with Joe Dunn. Then I did it for 6 years with Espo. And you can't tell me that people got abused under Espo. It just didn't happen, you know. But here's a story, and this is a fact. When I was in the 2-0, I get up to my very first CompStat, which was probably about the 4th CompStat that they ever did. And I get up to the podium, and Anemone said, and Anemone liked me, right? He knew me from ESU. He let me handle a hostage situation without sticking his nose in. And that is not Louis Anemone.
That's right.
Louis would be all over everything all the time. He'd probably be the first one going through the door. And I get up at CompStat, and he says, Garry, what's going on with crime? I said, well, you know, the biggest crime that we have is larceny. And, you know, there's really 3 categories. There's unattended property, there's chain snatchers, and there's credit cards being lost in bars. I said, and this is it. He goes, what's going on with grand larcenies, Garry? I was like, I thought I was answering his question. And I start speaking again, and he just wanted to holler. And he hollered. He's like, what's going on 79th Street and Broadway? Well, that's the transit hub, as you know, Tommy, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's where a lot of transit crime was being reported.
For sure.
So, and it just didn't matter. And I just looked at my special ops lieutenant, and we just kind of shrugged our shoulder and stood there and listened to it for 40 minutes. And then we left. And, 2 months later, I was one of the victims of the first ever emergency CompStat. It was December 7th. Okay.
Yeah.
December 7th. And it was the 2-0, and I forget who else. And it turns out that my special ops was leaving. That was the 6th was his last day, and everybody's going out to send him off on a party. And the phone rings at 6 o'clock, and I answer it at the desk. And it's a CompStat unit telling me that we have CompStat at 7 a.m. the next morning. And my lieutenant's standing there. He says, well, what are we going to do? I said, well, we're going to go to dinner, that's for sure. We went out and we did what we were going to do. And I stayed over at the precinct, right? So I shower, I shave, I'm getting dressed, and there's a knock on my door. And I'm like, what's going on? They said, there's some commissioner downstairs. I said, what do you mean some commissioner? What does he look like? So, hey, he's a chubby guy. He's got a bow tie and wingtip shoes and a Homburg hat. I said, oh, that's Jack Mason. And I go down, and he's looking at my pin maps, right? And I can't help myself. And I'm like, Commissioner, is there any meeting behind a pre-dawn visit on December 7th? And he looks at me and he goes, your pin maps suck. Just like that. And that's what it was back then. So if anybody had a problem with me holding people accountable because they weren't doing their job, we had some CompStat hits that Espo and I knew we had people by the short hairs, and nobody got hurt.
Exactly.
Nobody got hurt.
No, exactly. And I think I'd like to, save that. We're going to get to that because after we finish your career, we'll get into some of the things going on in the country right now, which includes leadership, policing in 2025, and so forth. So, you 3-3 precinct. If I remember correctly, and I didn't do the research. Well, I did some research today, but I didn't come across this. Something about the block. You took over like blocks in the 3-3 and then cleaned up
model
those
block
blocks
program.
one block at a time.
The model block program.
Oh yeah. It was a fascinating thing because I got there, and like 3-4 weeks after I got there, narcotics had a nice takedown. They took out 44 drug dealers from 163rd Street between Amsterdam and Broadway. It's not a big block. There were like 5 apartment buildings there, but it was, Nick Estavillo used to call it the nest, like it was the center of everything that was going on up there. There's video from the investigation, guys standing on the street with machine guns protecting their spots. You could literally buy a kilo of cocaine off the hood of a car in 1995 in the 3-3 precinct. So they take out this nice narcotics case. And when I looked at it, I said, these guys did a great job. Now, what do we do from here to make sure it doesn't go back? And it was a drive-up location where you could drive in from New Jersey or Pennsylvania, Westchester, Long Island, right? It's right at the tip of Manhattan, over to George Washington Bridge and back to wherever you came from. And we decided that we were going to hold on to it. When I used the phrase, I said, my dad never liked taking the same territory twice. And why should we be doing it? And we would always do something about supply, but we never did anything about demand. Now, I'm not going to fix people who want to take heroin. That's just not our job, right? But I can prevent them from buying at that location and ensure that the demand goes someplace else. So we held on to the block. And then at the same time, we brought in city resources to clean it up, painted over graffiti, cleaned out. There was a chicken farm in a lot, which I'm sure you can believe in Washington Heights back then. Abandoned vehicles on the street, fixing all the street lights that shot out. Then we organized each one of the buildings into tenant associations and then organized them all into a block association. We got the landlords on board. They fixed the locks on the doors. They put in, special lighting and all of these things. And it was the most remarkable thing. I saw 12-year-old kids learning how to ride a bike.
Yeah.
Think about that, 12 years old. They couldn't learn to ride a bike because they couldn't go outside.
That's crazy.
And I met two guys who lived across the street from each other for almost 30 years, but had never met because they couldn't go out on the street. They'd come out, they'd run to the bodega, they'd come back. And it was one of the most gratifying experiences that I ever did. Because people, we had, the other thing was, at the time, my Spanish was pretty good. And I would hold community meetings in Spanish. And when your name is McCarthy and you can speak Spanish, people kind of notice that. And I gave a speech. We had a big block party, and I'll never forget it. Joe Raguso was the XO of the borough. And there's a picture of him, and I'm up at the podium speaking Spanish, and he's like this, looking at me like, where is it coming from? But that turned that entire area around. And then we did it on consecutive blocks. We took a 4-block stretch of the worst neighborhoods in Washington Heights and turned them around. And, you know, success has many fathers. And when Wilbur Chapman was the chief of patrol, he put me up at CompStat one day when he was filling in for Anna Moan. And he says, Gary, tell me about what you're doing on 163rd Street. So I told the story. Safer wasn't there. And Chapman says, you know, after CompStat, I'm soon. And he says, we're going to have to give the boss a briefing on this because you're onto something here. And I'll never forget, I gave Safer the briefing. George Grasso is the deputy commissioner for legal matters. And Safer looks at Grasso at the table and he says, George, get me a yes attorney for this one. We're going to make this one work. And we did.
That's hilarious.
So that we could get it done. Well, you know, if you didn't want to do something in the NYPD, you went to legal, and they would say, "No, you can't do it. There's liability." Okay, we can't do it, right?
It's everywhere.
So, yeah,
lawyers.
So Gary, before we got a Arbueno worked for McCarthy in the 3-3 back in '99. Straight to the foot post in the model block. Great memories from those days back in the 3-3. Thanks for the comment. Appreciate it. So Gary, before we jump up in the ascension up to the CompStat dais, I got a little sports action going on here. Where did you play baseball? When did you play baseball?
That's in college. I played football and baseball at Albany State. And now I've got an 8-year-old, and I'm coaching two baseball teams because that's a pretty good swing right there. So I'm teaching my son.
I don't know. I think you could turn the hips a little more, but I think you're all right.
What was that?
I think you could have turned your hips a little more, but you're all right. You're good. You got good form.
Yeah, not bad.
No,
and there's no earphones.
And then you couldn't get enough of football, and you had to play while you were on the job.
Yeah, and it's funny what happened. I played a couple of years when I was a sergeant. And then I got caught up in studying for promotional exams. And I got away from the team. And then Steve McAllister had come up and worked for me in the 2-0 as a lieutenant. And he says, hey, we're going out to LA in a couple of weeks. Why don't you come with us? And that was it. I was hooked again. And probably the stupidest thing I've ever done is play football till I was 50. But I can't tell you how much fun it was, and the camaraderie. The guys.
I know Steve McAllister, but did you know I played Little League with his brother Sean?
Oh no, I did not.
Yeah, Mary.
Well, all you guys in Brooklyn are related, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. Mary Queen of Heaven parish in. Well, I was actually on the Marine Park side. He was more on the other side of Flatbush Avenue. My parish was St. Thomas Aquinas, but Mary Queen of Heaven had a better baseball league, so I jumped over. Yeah. So
yeah, Stevie's a good athlete. There was a time when he and I were the two linebackers for the team.
Yep.
You know, and one thing that I always say that I actually heard my son repeat recently. I say that being a linebacker is a way of life. It's not a position on a football field.
Well, trust me, I have one of those too. My son played for JMU, played linebacker.
Yeah, you told me that.
Yeah, he was a little too slow for a white guy, you know. He couldn't go back into coverage. Did good on the line. He was okay. But anyway, let's get back to stuff. How do you get up to the deputy commissioner of operations?
Well, after the Luima scandal, they sent Ray Diaz out to the 7-0 for a while, and then they sent me out there. They ran into a whole bunch of problems because they transferred black cops into the 7-0, thinking that they were doing something good, and you can't transfer people based on their race. Go figure, right? So there were lawsuits, there was low morale. The place, and I'm not sure what it looks like today or if they're even still using it, but the basement would flood whenever there was, whenever something happened. Joe Dunn was the chief of department at the time, and they sent me out there to build morale and get everybody. Howard Safin said, "Gary, I want you to go bring that place back into the police department." And I lived in Rockland at the time, and as I'm walking out the door, he says to me, "By the way, where do you live?" And it's like they got out the string and they put it on my house, and they said, "Okay, Brooklyn South. That's as far as we can make them go." One day it took me 3.5 hours.
Oof.
And I got Joe Dunn, Pat Kelleher, and the commissioner to all come out and address roll calls at the 7-0. And Joe Dunn, you know how comedic he can be. He says, this was during West Nile virus when it was really happening, right? And they were fogging the streets and everything. And he says, look at the bright side. No self-respecting mosquito would be caught dead in this building, so you're safe from the West Nile virus. But it was amazing what leadership can do and different management styles. Ray Diaz, hardest working man, but he was there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and mopping the floors and straightening up the pictures on the windows, on the walls, all at the same time. But I loved being out on patrol. I'm out there making arrests with them, and they saw a little different thing. And they had 3 different Christmas parties when I got there. And I was only there for a year, but the following year, they had 1 Christmas party, and everybody went to it. It was one of the most gratifying experiences of my police career, because one of the things Pat Kelleher told me, and it was genius, there were 330 people in that precinct at the time. It was a big, big precinct. And within 6 weeks, I knew everybody's first name. And that blew everybody's mind. And, we got everybody back to work. A couple of guys I had to kind of push around a little bit. And it's funny because they were good cops and they decided that they didn't like what they were doing now. And both of them were on promotional lists for sergeant. Now, fast forward, I'm sitting on the dais, and if you remember where I sat in the front row, it was like right in front of the commissioner. One of these guys, when they came across the stage, stopped, shook my hand and said, "Boss, you were right, I'm sorry." Each one of them. Of course, I had to kind of make them work, and they got it. But after the 7-0, I get a phone. Actually, I got a phone call from a friend of mine who said, "Hey, I heard a rumor that you're getting Norris's job." If you remember, Eddie Norris was the deputy commissioner for me. And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about that." And, I hang up the phone with him, and my pager goes off. And I look, it's a 374 number, which is the exchange for headquarters at the time. And the battery falls out of it. And now I don't know what the rest of the number is. Like right after that phone call. And I'm like, what the hell is this? So I end up getting the battery back into the pager, and it's not working. And then got a call at the desk to call the commissioner's office. And Safer brought me down the next day and gave me the job. And I got to tell you something, I was just awestruck, to be in that type of company and, working with a guy like Joe Dunn as my partner, and then Joe Esposito, and, being in the top 4. You go off and sit with the mayor every Thursday afternoon for a couple of hours.
Yep.
It just changed everything about what I was doing in my world. And, you know, I came up with a couple of pretty decent ideas. And, you know, there's two things that people don't like: the way things are and change, right?
Change. Right.
And there were a couple of people who didn't want to come along. And I'm like, why are you doing this? This isn't going to be good for you. And one guy actually, the only other guy who I probably forced to retire, but he did it to himself when I came out with the narcotics strategy that was focused on reducing crime, not just making arrests and making seizures, which wasn't really getting the job done.
Right.
And somebody retired over that because Ray Kelly wanted a presentation, and this guy was talking about paying the piper. And I was like, who's the piper? Boss, are you the piper? I'm not the piper. Joe Dunn, are you the piper? No. Espo, who's the piper? And the guy sat back and he was like, uh-oh. And he basically left and resigned. But that wasn't my fault.
Yeah. So walk us through, like, when did you leave the NYPD and you shoot over to Newark? What transpired then? What happened then? And then we're gonna get from Newark, we're gonna get to Chicago, and then I think this Chicago stuff could bring us into current events if that works for you.
Yeah. So the administration changes. Oh, by the way, there's a couple of good stories with the administration change. We're going from Giuliani now to Ray Kelly coming in with Bloomberg. And, you know, all these different people are getting phone calls to go sit with Ray Kelly beforehand. And I don't get a phone call. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And he shows up on his first day in the office. And I get a call about 11 o'clock, come on up and see the boss. And I'm like, oh, God, this is going to suck. I don't even have my 20 years in, right? And I go up and he says, Gary, come in, sit down. And, you know, there's nails in the wall, and you can see where the pictures were with Carrick. And he says to me, listen, I've been watching what you do. I love how you do it, and I want you to keep doing it. So me being my wife, I can't help it. I go like this. Can I go now, boss? and one of the things that I did with Kelly, which was really, really a good move, was I said, listen, when I'm speaking, I'm creating policy. When I'm telling people to do things at CompStat. So why don't we get an hour of just me time every week and make sure that I'm on the same page of what you want to hear. And I did that. It was probably the smartest thing I ever did in my police career, because it put me in a position where I was in lockstep with the guy, and nobody was going to touch me at that point. So I get one of my guys comes to me and he says, hey, you know, you've been deputy commissioner for like 4 years. Chicago's looking for a superintendent. Why don't you throw in a resume and see what happens? Take the temperature. I said, yeah, maybe I'll do that. So I go up to see Kelly and I tell him I'm going to do that. He said, sure, let me know if I could help you, whatever. I put it in and I become a finalist, right? I become one of the 3 finalists. It's in the news, everything else. And it was a Chicago job. Where Mayor Daley already knew who he wanted to have his guy from the inside of CPD. By the way, a great guy, Phil Klein. Don't think I'm talking bad about it. But it was just typical Chicago politics. It was all a show. And Daley is like parading me around like, hey, look at this hot shot we got from New York. But no, I got my guy right here, and that's who we're going with. And as a result of that, a guy who was on Bloomberg's transition team was working with Cory Booker. And he said, you know, he's looking for a police director. Why don't you reach out to Garry McCarthy? And that's how I ended up going over to Newark, which, you know, that was a trip, man. Newark is a trip.
So Mike Freed says, I remember seeing a video, and I believe Gary brought CompStat to Newark, and that changed things. Gary should have stayed there. What do you think? Should have stayed in Newark?
Stayed in Newark? Are you crazy? I was surrounded.
Yeah.
I was surrounded. Oh my God. You know, a lot of really good people and a lot of people who are just set in their ways of doing things. And Newark at the time, and I don't know the condition it's in today, almost was it wasn't happy unless they were miserable. I don't know how to explain it, but you give them a gold bar, they would say it was too heavy. Newark was just, I had to fight everything. So Booker offers me the job eventually, right? After go through the whole process. And Ray Kelly giving me some advice. And he says, Garry, if you're going to take that job, make sure that you're going to have the latitude to really run the department. So I told Booker, I said, listen, I'd love to do the job for you. I think that it's going to be a great partnership. I said, but the first thing I need is that I'm really going to run the department. I'll keep your politics in mind, but I'm going to do what we need to do to create a performance-based organization here. And he agreed to it. So the very first day or two, I interview all the chiefs are civil service, except for the actual chief. And there's a thing in New Jersey about how the director only creates policy, the chief runs operations. And I was assured that that was not going to happen in Newark. Well, lo and behold, the chief of patrol turns out to be a really sharp guy. And I said, what do you need? He says, well, I need this captain. I said, okay, I'll give you the captain. He says, but the guy's he's a political person. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, the administration doesn't like him. I said, okay, but you want him, right? He said, yeah, okay, fine. I transfer him. 15 minutes later, I got a visit from the mayor's chief of staff. What are you doing? You can't do that. And I was like, no. It says right here, Garry McCarthy transferred Captain so-and-so to the Bureau of Patrol. Yeah, and that's my signature. See, I can do it. That's where it started. 15 minutes into like my second day. And it was like pulling rocks uphill the whole time because everything was with resistance. Everything. The captain's union was run by a really goofy guy. In New Jersey, you're not allowed to have hollow point bullets. It's against the law, at least it was back then. He made an allegation to the state police that I had hollow point bullets in my gun. That's how bad it was. I got T-boned in my car driving to work one day. This guy went to the guy's house who hit me and had him take out a summons saying I went through a red light. That was the union.
Yep.
So you can imagine what the rest of it was like if those are the guys we used to be working with to make the place better. And then we had to lay people off. We had to collapse everything. We got rid of all our specialty units. And, we had to lay off like 10% of the department. But we still succeeded.
I remember that. Yep.
We still succeeded. Cory Booker became a senator based upon his performance with crime. His performance. And right about that time, here's the other thing, and I'm going to be doing a show about this. Consent decrees. When I get to Newark, people are going back 16 years complaining that they wanted a consent decree and the U.S. attorney to come in and investigate the policies and practices of the Newark Police Department. Now, I haven't even walked through the door yet. Well, this just keeps going on for 5 years and 5 years and 5 years. And then as I'm walking out the door, Wendy Altman actually gets to the U.S. attorney and has them come in and say that they're going to do a civil rights investigation. So that one gets hung on me, even though they went back 16 years. So that happened. Then I get out to Chicago, and it was crazy. I'm sitting on my couch in my office, kind of lamenting that Ray Kelly's never going to leave. So I can't stay here much longer. And that evening, I get a phone call from a friend of mine at the White House who asked if I was interested in applying for the Chicago job again. And at the time, Chuck Ramsey was supposed to get the job. Chuck was a guy who actually was a deputy chief in Chicago, went to Washington, D.C., and he is just He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. Really, really smart and big cojones. Let's put it that way. And Chuck is in D.C. at the time. And I call up Chuck and I said, Chuck, what's going on? Somebody just asked me if I wanted to apply. I said, you got the job, right? He says, no, it just fell apart. I said, really? He says, yeah, I'm not going to take it. I said, okay. So I went back and I told him, yeah, I'll send a resume. And I gave it to Rahm Emanuel. And on the next day, flew out to O'Hare, met him in the O'Hare Hilton. We sat for 2.5 hours talking. And from that point, I probably had the job. Now I had to apply for it, which was like doing, a doctorate thesis. And got that done and started the job. And I got to tell you, Tom and Pete, it was really, I felt my perfect place and time. All the maturation that had happened to me, starting with being a sergeant, right? Then a lieutenant, and then a captain, and then a DI, then an inspector, then a deputy commissioner, then a director. It's a learning process, and people don't necessarily get that. And when I got out here to Chicago, what I found was promotions were political, and whoever was in was going to put their people in, and whoever was out was all going to get dumped. And, that's no way to run a business. I used to say it was like a game of shoots and ladders, right? You're in today, you're out tomorrow. And it had nothing to do with it. And there's super, super cops out here. I mean, these are really good cops.
I remember you telling me once you had great cops and weak management. Is that right? Did I get that right? Do I remember that right?
Yeah, because the management was political.
Yeah.
So, so I did the same thing with Rahm Emanuel. I said, look, I'm going to run a department. I'll keep your politics in mind. To his credit, he stuck to that. I mean, I had to argue with him over everything. But by the same token, I made all the decisions while I was the superintendent here. And for 5 years, we reduced murders, we reduced crime, we reduced police-related shootings, we reduced complaints against officers, and we did it in 30,000 less arrests. I think that's pretty good that every single year that occurred. And what was it? It was using the CompStat model. Problem solving. Business management of policing. Yeah. And making it Chicago-centric. So you want to know what's wrong with Chicago politics. I'm going to give you 2 great examples. The biggest problem in Chicago is gang violence. You're raised as a shark. Your grandfather was a shark, your father's a shark, your son's a shark, right? And you hate the Jets, right? So you guys are going back and forth like Russia and Ukraine. So there were retaliation shootings that were happening within 4 to 6 minutes of a shooting.
Yep.
And well, what are we doing? We're doing data-driven policing. So we did an audit. We used all our databases, right? All that intel information we have. We got all our tactical guys and gals to come in and identify all the gangs in the city, all the gang turfs in the city, and all the gang members that we could identify, and all the gang conflicts. So that when Tommy Joyce gets shot here, everybody doesn't go to the scene. Once we realize that Tommy Joyce is a jet, we go to the Sharks territory and we pick up jets with guns and stop the retaliation shooting. Now, that's a shared concept that I took right from Charlie Beck, the chief out in Los Angeles at the time.
Yep.
Major City Chiefs was the greatest learning environment because we all exchanged what worked, what didn't work. Let's try this, let's do something different. And that gets us to the lowest murder rate in Chicago in 2013 and 14 since 1964. Okay.
Right.
Okay. The second, so eventually they get rid of the gang. So you can't do data-driven policing without the data, but they eliminated the database. because it was offensive to some people. Well, I'm not a gang member. Why am I in the gang database? Well, it's not like an employer is calling the police department and saying, "Hey, do you know this guy Joyce? Oh yeah, he's a jet. Don't hire him." No, none of that happened. But the politics of Chicago had it that Lori Lightfoot wanted to get rid of the gang database based upon what? I don't know. And that's what she did. Okay. The other stark example, and this is obvious. This is so obvious it's absurd. Was the shooting of Adam Toledo. Adam Toledo is a 13-year-old kid who's on the street on a Tuesday night at 2 o'clock in the morning. And believe it or not, even in Chicago, Tuesday night is a school night. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
He's on the street at 2 o'clock in the morning with a gangbanger.
Yep.
And he's a shorty, they call him, right?
Yep.
There's a shot spotter alert because the gangbanger is shooting at somebody. The police respond. Gangbanger gives the gun to the shorty. The shorty fires. He ends up turning at the officer, and in 5/6 of a second, the officer fires a shot. Ends up killing him as he's dropping the gun. A real tragedy. But the response of Chicago was to eliminate shot spotter and not allow people to conduct foot pursuits without permission from a supervisor. What type of thought process is that? So
they just implemented that in the county I live in, Gary, in Fairfax, Virginia. And similar story, but not so similar. Person committed to shoplifting at the Tyson's Corner Mall. Police give chase. There's a struggle. Person shot dead. So they changed the entire policy where now you need a boss's permission to chase someone on foot. I get
who's
it.
the chief in Fairfax County? Is that Kevin? Oh, no. Okay. No.
Yeah, I'm not sure who made the decision. But
so Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, can't say a sentence without saying black and brown people. He just can't do it. He has to say black and brown people, black and brown people, black and brown people. Where do you think ShotSpotter is? It's in the most crime-ridden neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, which generally are African American.
Yeah.
So he's taking resources away from the people that he's trying to save. I don't
well,
know.
as we know, not every listener might know. I mean, ShotSpotter doesn't see color; it triangulates gunfire. And as we all know, sometimes people don't call the police even when someone is shot. So then, lo and behold, you have ShotSpotter was at least having police respond to those shootings. Well, with that gone now, you're back to that instances where people are getting shot and those timely notifications aren't being made. It's tragic.
Yeah.
Hey, Gary, what do you think?
And somebody's keeping a tally.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Somebody's keeping a tally on this online. And when I last looked, it was up to 46 people who died where ShotSpotter would have been. And the police did not respond in a timely fashion. Now, it doesn't mean they were going to survive, right? We know that.
Right.
But we also know that some of them probably would have.
Yeah. It's
just the boneheadedness of these decisions. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this a good time to segue to wearing the badge and that excerpt with Pastor Corey Brooks?
Oh, yeah, Corey Brooks. Okay. So one of the, Tommy and Pete, in policing, we know that there's racial overtones in everything we do. We know it, right? And there's some people who cannot have a conversation about this. All they could do is point fingers, right? Say, you're a racist, cops are racist, right? Well, I'm a history buff, right? And I know history very well. And during this segment, and I don't know if you're going to play this part where I talk about community meetings, Tom?
This is the part where, Gary, where you told me the cue up where they talk about the community needs to be in touch with their own problems and not blame the police.
Hey, Tommy, before you start that.
Go ahead, just play it.
Yeah.
Community. The fact that in 2025, we have to have a discussion about Black boys being 100 times more likely to be murdered or to commit crimes is unfathomable. The fact that we're not discussing it everywhere and trying to come up with solutions is even worse. I think what we're suffering from in our community is a leadership problem that wants to act as if all of our issues and all of our problems are a direct result of the Chicago Police Department or in other urban areas.
No, all my fault.
Yeah. And we have to have leadership in our community that stands up and says, listen, these are tough topics. We hate to discuss them. We wish that we didn't have to, but the truth of the matter is that facts don't lie. Mm-hmm. And these are the facts. And we have to decide either we're going to deal with the facts or we're going to continue to sweep the facts underneath the rug. And so many times we've had leaders who don't want to air our dirty laundry out in public. But until we do, we're going to continue to see the vicious cycles of violence, of murders, of crime that we see consistently in our neighborhood.
He's a good guy, Corey Brooks. I asked him to be on the show very specifically because I knew that he and I could talk about race. We could have a conversation. We can hopefully start moving a conversation forward that starts with recognition of what has occurred. And that's where history comes in. And one of the things that I say in this segment is one of my favorite things to do was to go to community meetings on the South and the West Side, which are predominantly African-American in Chicago, and talk about race. And, I would get up and I would say, Chicago is one of the most racist cities in the country. And Black audiences talk back to you, right? They're like, that's right. And, there's redlining. Say it, tell it, preach. They're telling me to preach. I'm going down the line. Segregation, redlining, slavery, black codes. And they're getting all whooped up. And then I finally say, and segregation and racism is bad, right? And they're like, that's right. I said, then why do we insist on it? And there's like an audible, huh? I said, when I got here, everybody wanted black cops and black commanders in black neighborhoods. That's segregation.
Right.
The only way we're going to get over this is recognition of the history and meeting each other and having conversations and getting to know different people. And those meetings, without exception, were phenomenal. And they would come up to me and they would say, nobody who looks like you has ever spoken to us like that. And I said, well, it's just truth telling, right? You can't change the history. I don't care what you do with DEI. You're not going to fix history.
Right.
Not 400, 500 years of racist policies that were enforced by the white police officers, right? And then when there's a bad police shooting, it's thrown right into the middle of it.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things is I sent the Black Commander, Corey Brooks, here in Chicago, and they didn't get along at all. And the next thing I knew, I was refereeing a boxing match between two black guys, a black preacher and a black commander. And I was like, see, that didn't work out so well, did it, Pastor?
Yeah.
But
well, I'll tell you something
about it now.
What
nasty.
Yeah, but what some people forget. And by the way, the chief in Fairfax that enacted this policy is Kevin Davis. I don't know if that was the name you were thinking of. Yeah, they proudly announced this. I was so upset. I even went,
Kevin did that?
Yeah, they initiated this no pursuit policy unless you get permission.
I am shocked.
And I even had a conversation where I mentioned this an arrest from Halloween of 1997, where we saw these guys in the 4-3, actually, it became the 4-5, under the L in Westchester Square. These guys were just walking. They wouldn't go in the light. They were walking in all these dark areas. I was with Sean O'Toole in the car and Benny Torado, right? And so we're like, why are these guys favoring the shadows, avoiding the light? So we just decide, there's a little suspicious. We get out of the car. They bolt. Comes over the radio 2 seconds later with the tones. It was a homicide. These guys tried to get into a party. people at the door were like, hey, we don't know you, get the fuck out. And they shot the guy in the head and killed him. So, I mean, that foot pursuit today, though, would never happen in Fairfax County because mere suspicion, you're not going to get a green light to chase a guy. And when I told them that, they were dumbfounded. But I was like offended. Like, really, you're handcuffing the police. And here's the other thing. You mentioned race. I was a housing cop, as you know. We looked sometimes for the white people that were walking through the projects that looked like they didn't belong there. So, I mean, that cuts both ways. Hey, what are you doing in the building? Hey, I'm visiting my girlfriend. What apartment she live in? They didn't own the apartment. You find out that they were there to buy drugs. So, I mean, it cuts both ways.
When I was in the 3-3, the Southern District was going to sue the NYPD for our policies. And Howard Safer asked me, as the CEO of the 3-3, to talk to Mary Jo White, which I did. I went down and sat with them. The union went nuts. They were like, you can't do that. If you lie, you're going to jail. Or how can I lie?
Right.
And based on a conversation that I had with her, and I showed her the statistics, we were disproportionately stopping white folks in Washington Heights because they were there to buy drugs.
Correct.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And by the way, here's something else. When the stop and frisk, this is a big one. This one drives me nuts. I talk about it on every show. The stop and frisk issue, which we all know was stop, question, and frisk.
Terry.
And the ACLU took the question out, right? It's Terry versus Ohio, 1968.
Yep.
Supreme Court decision. Articulable, reasonable suspicion, you can stop somebody. Not population demographics. So, this explodes in New York City years back, and I'm here in Chicago. And my press guy comes to me and he says, well, what are we going to do about this? I said, why? He says, well, you ran crime strategy in New York for a long time. I said, we're going to do analysis. And we did analysis that showed in 2013 and 14, when we got the lowest murder rate in the city, who we stopped, when we stopped, and where we stopped was within 1 or 2 percentage points of offender description and arrest, not the population demographic. So you look at this, 2 years of data. This is thousands of stops. And you look at Englewood, which is primarily African-American. I think it's like 98% African-American. That one white guy who lives there is going to get stopped a lot if we have to use population demographics, because I got to get my white guy on the sheet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And what's that going to do for crime? First of all,
Yeah.
when the offender description for robberies, shootings, and murders was 100% African-American, right?
But you know,
Now
what you
go to
wonder-
another Lincoln Square or Lincoln Park in Chicago, which is only, I think it was 8% African American, but we're stopping 54% African Americans. Offender description was 56%. What we actually found in Chicago is that we're disproportionately stopping white folks, and we have the data to show it. So
you know what to say.
we're being held to a standard that if we use would be considered unconstitutional.
Yes.
Right.
But you wonder how many people of color have died as a result of this activism that stops the police from going out there and doing their job. I mean,
I got fired. And by the way, anybody who says that I resigned is mistaken. There's another story for you. Rahm Emanuel let me in on December 1st. And there was a setup where the front page of the Sun-Times had called for my resignation or termination. And Rahm calls me in, and the day before that article comes out, used almost the exact same words to me, asking me what we were going to do moving forward. And then when I was telling him everything we were doing, he says, you know what, let's talk about it tomorrow. And the hackles went up on my neck. And I said, Mayor, I said, I've been doing this for a little while, and I've been around the block a couple of times, and I can tell you something, that when I'm gone, they're going to come after you, and I'm the best shield that you have because I can go out and take all these hits, and you could stay in the background. He says, yeah, okay, fine, let's talk about it tomorrow. So he calls me in the next day with the article, and he says, I think you should resign. goes into this soliloquy about, the best interest of the city and so on. And when he's all done, I say, no. He says, no. I said, I'm not going to resign. I said, I didn't do anything wrong. And I had just done a whole bunch of press where they asked me if I was going to resign. It was a complete setup. The day that I'm going out to do all these interviews with the press is the day that the Sun-Times has this article written by the editor-in-chief of the Sun-Times, ironically, with the same exact words Rahm Emanuel used. Really remarkable. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, he tells me, he says, no, you don't understand. He goes into it again. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm not going to resign. I just told people I'm not going to resign, and I didn't do anything wrong. And he says, well, I want to tell people that we came to this decision together. I said, we haven't. He says, well, I'm the mayor, and that's what I'm going to do. And my last words were to him were, you could do whatever the F you want to do. And I walked out of his office. That was on December 1st. That afternoon, his chief of staff calls me and says, we got to do some paperwork. I said, well, what paperwork? She says, your letter of resignation. I said, did you talk to this guy? She says, yeah, but. And I said, there's no yeah, but here. This went on for 17 days. Virtually every day she would call me, ask me if I was resigning. And I was like, Eileen, please stop calling me. I'm not going to resign. And on the 17th, they got a FOIA request from the press for my letter of resignation, which didn't exist. And on the 17th, she calls me again and she says, well, okay, you're not going to resign. You want a letter of termination? I said, no, but if that's what you're going to do, then just do it. So she signs the letter of termination for me, the chief of staff for the mayor, not the mayor, and sends it to me, which I immediately forward to my wife with my department cell phone, because I was still the superintendent of police. And I attached to it, would you look at this? He didn't even have the balls to sign it himself. I FOIA'd all my emails that had something to do with Laquan McDonald. And there were 2 out of the 1,500 that went back and forth in City Hall. One of them had to do with the press release. The other one was that one that I just sent to my wife. So on the front page of the Sun-Times and the Tribune the next day, McCarthy said Ron didn't have the balls to fire him himself.
Nice.
He
He loved that.
Yeah.
So
that's rough. I mean, from our side, I remember following that.
In 2016, after I got fired, the murder rate in Chicago went up 64%. 64%. And you know who was dying? It wasn't white folks in Lincoln Park. It was black folks on the south and the west side.
Yep.
So
all right, so that's good. Yeah, that's a good segue. So fast forward, crime goes up when you leave, Garry, and then how does it do? And then what happens in 2019 going into 2020? Chauvin, George Floyd, Summer of Love, and then it's hitting the fan. Where are we policing in 2025 as a result of what happened in the last 5 years?
We're on our heels. I went back. I'm running a small police department in Willow Springs, and for the first time after like 7 years, I go to one of these police conferences like IACP and Major City Chiefs. And in the past, and I'm a lifetime member, I was a vice president of the Major City Chiefs. And in the past, you would go to these conferences and I would say, Tommy, how you doing? And your response would be, well, my murders are down, but my shootings were up, so I'm really worried. I'm like, no, Tommy, how are you doing? Right? And we would sit down and we would talk about crime. And then we'd go to breakfast and we would talk about crime. And we'd come back, sit around the table and talk about crime. And we'd do lunch and talk about crime. Back around the table, go to dinner at night, have a couple of cocktails, talk about crime, and get up and do it again the next day. I go to a conference out in Dallas a couple of years ago, and 85% of the conversation was about DEI. 85% of the conversation was about DEI. Now, mind you, when I was making my promotions in both Newark and Chicago, where I was making the decisions, It was spread out. I made sure that there was, but by the same token, I was finding qualified people. You don't promote people based upon anything except their ability. And we actually were about to unveil a community relations strategy because it dawned on me that nobody had ever really done one. And we went around the city collecting ideas from the communities that were most distressed and putting them together into a package. And this was never released because the release that I was going to give to the pastors, that meeting was taken by Rom to try and quell what was going on with the LaQuan McDonald shooting, which, by the way, was hidden on the civil side, not on the criminal.
Right.
And by the way, you want to talk about dysfunction. The police superintendent in Chicago is not in charge of the discipline program of the Chicago Police Department. If I wanted to fire officers, I could only go and recommend termination to the police board, who are 9 civilians, who disagreed with my termination recommendations 75% of the time for the first 3 years that I was there. So I'm trying to fire bad cops, and the civilian board is not letting me do it. So accountability without accountability equals failure, right? And that's exactly the scenario that we're looking at here in Chicago. They added 7 layers of oversight between the mayor and the police superintendent right now in the city of Chicago. How can you get anything done?
And the cops know
And I
that.
don't
The cops
know
know that
the
you're new.
fact that people can always tell us how to police better, right? When you go to a hospital, do you tell the doctor how to fix your finger, right? When a plumber comes to your house, do you tell him which pipes to replace? When an electrician comes, you tell him to connect the black wire to the red wire? Why is it policing? Everybody knows how to do it better than we do. And what's really troubling, and I think we talk about it in the episode with Pastor Brooks, is there was a collection of criminologists, sociologists, police chiefs for the 21st century policing strategy. I forget exactly what it was called. But they went around and collected all the best practices in the country. They put them into one document and they passed them out. It's right there. It was collected from the smartest people involved in the business, and it's being ignored based upon politics right now.
Yeah.
So we're on our heels. We're on. Morale is terrible. Just about every.
Retention, recruiting is down as a result of this stuff as well, which is making it difficult to hire qualified people that want to be cops.
Right.
You know, so it's
So how do we fix it? Like, how does it go? Because I know the recruiting is across the country, every agency. You know, you might hear some Florida agencies say they're not having problems. They're probably on a smaller scale. But the bigger cities across the board, any city in any state that's fairly decent in size, even in the Texases and the Floridas, are still struggling to some degree, maybe not as bad. But like, what are they going to do? And the last podcast I was a guest on, I said, well, you know, like, someone has to do it. Who's going to do this job?
a good question. It's a question for the agencies. But Tommy, it's not just police. Federal agencies are also suffering from the same issues. All of these issues, by the way.
Yeah, look what's happening to ICE.
ATF,
You know?
ATF for the first time in my knowledge has a retention problem where they have agents leaving to go to other agencies or just leaving to go to the private sector. I mean, that was unheard of.
Yeah, that's my question to you, Pete, is have you ever seen even federal affected this way before?
Never.
In any way?
And it's happened over the last 3 years where I know the Ferguson effect is a lot sooner. But no, it's spreading, you know. And look, the same thing Gary mentioned earlier, DEI. I'm telling you that happened at ATF. It wasn't a secret. It's kind of stopped happening. I don't know if you know right now, the guy who's technically running ATF is a former New York City housing cop, Bobby Cicada. So, he's put an end to that nonsense, but it was happening for a number of years. And that affects morale. So when you have those things happening in the organization, and then you have the demonization of the profession happening from outside, it's like a double-edged sword. It just, it's terrible.
Yeah. Okay,
Well,
so Gary, if I can
it's
pivot
interesting
now, I want to
because
show the other clip that I have from wearing the badge. It's with Ella French's mother. However, this segment does not talk to her, and you certainly can bring that up, and we can talk about Ella French and Junior, calling in as Junior. But the way you open this segment on wearing the badge, it talks about a really interesting comment that I was blown away when I saw it. 9/11 and September 12th and where we are now. So I'm going to play that if that's okay, and then love to hear your perspective on this. So let's see if I can get this up here.
Survivor at the World Trade Center. And post 9/11 in 2001, we were the greatest heroes in the world. First responders, firemen, police officers, EMTs, and so on. And somehow, and being sarcastic the way I am, people would say to me, people are never going to forget this. And I remember saying on 9/11, I said, they'll forget by tomorrow. They'll forget by 9/12. And I'm not sure I was that wrong, because policing in this country has just been kicked under the rug. And as a result, we're going to talk about what that means, violence against the police. And I'm going to trace a lot of this back. I'm a history buff. We're going to talk a little bit about history. And like I said, post 9/11, we were the greatest people on earth. Ferguson, 2014. Police shooting, and something that kind of blew my mind was the fact that the state's attorney in painstaking detail went through the entire process of the grand jury and detailed for at least an hour, maybe even an hour and a half, why he didn't indict the officer who shot and killed Michael Brown. And as a result, Ferguson blew up. But the thing that there's a couple of takeaways from Ferguson that people don't realize. The first one is, and I said this way back then, the police can turn a demonstration into a riot. And I believe that's what happened in Ferguson. You don't put SWAT officers with rifles on the front line when people are protesting. That goes way back in history to May 4th, 1970, Kent State shooting with the National Guard. But it gets worse than that, because while the officer was justified by the grand jury in everything that he did, the fallout from it was fumbled completely by the police. And I had the opportunity to sit down and listen to the colonel of the Missouri State Police, I believe it was, or maybe it was the county of St. Louis, who took over on the third day of that riot. And the things that he said were just astounding. And he's talking to police chiefs across the country. And he said, I took over on the third day, and every night it seemed when I got home and I went to take off my tie, things erupted. And I'm saying to myself, what were you doing home if you had a riot going on? It doesn't stop at curfew. It kind of goes up from there. But then he went on to talk about the whole thing. And if you remember, there's a famous picture of a police officer on top of a Bearcat, which is an armored vehicle. And he's pointing a rifle into the crowd. And naturally, that gins the crowd up. And people are going crazy. And the colonel says, well, I looked over and I saw that. And I sent one of my guys over and I said, go find out what he's doing up there with that rifle. And when my guy came back, he told me, well, he's using a scope to look into the crowd. And I said to myself, there's these things called binoculars. You don't have to point a rifle into a crowd, which is only going to enrage them more. And in my estimation, that was the case where it was fumbled, completely fumbled by the police. The more this guy talked, the worse it got. And we were all embarrassed by it. The point of Ferguson that I want to get to is the fact that the Attorney General of the United States went to Ferguson after the officer was not indicted and said that this was a complete miscarriage of justice and we could never let this happen again. Well, he's in charge of the justice system, and he's pointing the finger at the police. And I think that was a breaking point as far as police-community relations.
Okay. So I think you're right. The public relations side, again, I'm not there, I'm here, I'm home, I'm watching this, and the public relations was terrible, all their actions. But when the president comes out and says the things that he said, and the Justice Department, to your point, I mean, it was just a collide of bad things that happened. So go ahead, guys.
Well, I'll tell you one thing I would like to see, and forgive me, Gary, I don't want to offend anybody. Perf. I've seen some of these organizations not do, in my opinion, a good enough job of standing up for law enforcement, and I'd say some are actually pulling to the left. Perf perhaps being the biggest violator of that, from what I've seen. With that whole Guardians versus Warrior battle that they had for some time. I'm like, really? I mean, it almost seemed nonsensical. I would like to see leadership lead. And in that regard, like I said, I'd like to see some of these organizations be a little bit more vocal about taking the handcuffs off the police and having us get back to cops being cops. And look, as we said before on this podcast, no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop. We want to see good policing. We want to see effective policing. I walked the beat. Best time of my career, because the police are from the community from the police. We need to get back to that. Community policing worked, but we've let them pull us in the wrong direction, and no one's really leading the charge to get back to center, I would say, at least not vocally enough.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, and it's funny because the thing that I was going to say, and Tom, you were asking, how do we get back to center on this stuff, and it has to do with leadership. But I'm going to tell you something that Bill Bratton said, and I believe it to be true. He says, think back, and I think about this all the time. When I went to Newark, Chuck Ramsey was in Philadelphia, or D.C. Then he went to Philadelphia. Kathy Lanier took over D.C. Bill Bratton was in L.A. And so on down the line. Ed Davis was in Boston. And there was just a whole cadre of really talented, ballsy leaders who were out there doing those jobs. And, it all started, to my recollection, with Bill Bratton when he came to New York with Giuliani. He said, no, we're not doing that anymore. This is what we're going to do. And it succeeded. But guess what? They've abandoned it because of politics. So the thing that Bill Bratton said that I agree with, he says, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, all these different police chiefs across the country, and we were all succeeding at the same time. And leadership throw a dart at a map and come up with a star of a police chief. I'm not sure there's so many of them out there today, quite frankly.
No.
But I'm going to tell you to keep your eye on St. Louis, because Bob Tracy, who came out of the NYPD,
rock star,
he came into Chicago with me, and I recreated Deputy Commission Operations job for him. He was the Chief of Crime Control Strategies.
Right.
When I got fired, he went to Wilmington, Delaware. He succeeded there. I asked him if he looked around the Corvette and found any top secret documents, but he didn't tell me anything. After Wilmington, so he's in Wilmington getting awards from then President Trump for his crime reduction efforts, which is pretty fascinating. Then he goes to St. Louis, and after 2 years, he is succeeding wildly, using all the processes that we created in New York, that we took to Newark, then we took to Chicago, and we were able to make them Chicago-centric and Newark-centric based upon what was going on. And that's what he's doing in St. Louis. So after 2 years of success, just like when I got to Newark and people were clamoring for a U.S. attorney to come in and do civil rights investigations in Newark, people have been clamoring at the state level in Missouri to take over the St. Louis Police Department at the state level, which guess what? Happened about 6 months ago. And the governor has said, leave Bob Tracy alone. He's basically my guy. And he's going to stay the chief because of the job that he's doing.
Yeah.
I think Bob Tracy is a guy that you can hang it. If I had to bet on somebody, I'd put everything on Bob Tracy right now.
Okay, so there's
Because
one
he's-
I
chief.
agree.
Bobby's a great guy.
Dense Irishman, like
That's one agency. Maybe he goes on to one more job. Maybe the missus lets him do that or not, move one more time. But what about the rest of the country?
Brenda's-
And what about where are these leaders going to come from who are going to really get in these places and run these police departments the way we've seen them run in the past? And we know they can be run.
I think that it would be almost an opening of the floodgates type of thing, like Bill Bratton did in New York. When New York succeeded the way it did, people across the country started emulating what we were doing, right? They didn't say, oh, we're not doing. Oh, in Chicago, they also said after I left, we're not doing that New York shit anymore. And I said, you mean stopping people from dying? Yeah, we did. We stopped doing it. It's fine. Yeah, that's what we do.
Well,
But-
the other part of the equation that we did not deal with in New York, Gary, maybe you dealt with it in Illinois. I don't know that you did, but maybe you did, was the woke prosecutor. Prosecutors who don't want to put people in jail. There's another part of the equation that I don't know how that turns around. But it factors into what the police are allowed to do, no doubt.
I missed what you said.
The advent of the woke prosecutor, something that in my
Oh, yeah. Oh,
career
well,
never dealt
prosecutors,
with.
yeah.
So I mean, how does I mean that also affects law enforcement leadership because you have to kind of
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
without a doubt. You know, Cook County was referred to as Crook County instead. Look at Jesse Smollett. They had to get a special prosecutor to prosecute him.
Right.
And now we've got Eileen O'Neill Burke, who's a former judge, and she is no joke, as my wife Kristen says. So things are starting to turn in that direction. And, these things happen in cycles. And right now, we've got Trump in the White House, and he's just not going to take nonsense. He's doing what he wants to do, what he thinks is right. And I think that the politics are swinging back as people see how people are getting hurt.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Gary, we're up on 2 hours. So we got one more topic we talked about. So we'll go a little bit over. You got great stamina. Really appreciate it. I'm going to bring this up now, and I'm going to really just leave it to you. Last week, Pete brought on Derek Maltz, the former acting administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration. He is the leading, loudest voice on fentanyl, the undeclared war. But when you and I were talking, some things came up that I was not aware of. So I'm going to leave it to you. I'm going to let Pete is well versed in this area as well. I'm really going to let Pete and lead that conversation with you. And then when the time's appropriate, I'll bring up some other imagery. So,
Well,
Yeah. I mean, I know Derek's been big on the one pill can kill campaign. And as we know, I mean, there are kids out there who are popping an Adderall, who are taking a Valium because they're afraid to get on a plane thinking it's just a Valium, not knowing that a friend or colleague may have bought it online. And that one pill is leading to death. We've lost more people to fentanyl in the last 5 years than we lost to 70 years of war. And I wasn't aware, Gary, until Tommy told me that you or your family has been touched by this. So my heart goes out to you. I couldn't imagine what you went through, but it's something that's really a scourge on our country now. And just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, that's my daughter Kyla and myself when I was a much younger man, a sergeant in the 4-3 precinct. That's what I used to look like when you met me.
That's right.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anybody who can say that they don't know somebody who is going through this right now. And you threw out the number about more people the last 70 years of war than when we were losing to fentanyl. The one that I use all the time is, it's the same story you hear all the time. She was a 3-sport athlete in high school. She got into a car accident in June of her junior year, and her ankle got crushed. And when I say crushed, I mean pulverized. And she went through probably 7 or 8 surgeries, and they loaded her up with OxyContin. And we ended up with 18 years of addiction until such time as it finally happened. And in 2022, May 29th, 2022, I got the phone call. And I asked a friend of ours, Timmy McCormick, who just retired. He was the Bronx chief of detectives, and he got a couple of detectives to go over to her apartment and found her DOA. In 2022, 110,000 deaths in this country from opioid overdoses. And being a history buff, I know that in our 10-year active war in Vietnam, we lost 58,000 Americans in combat. So we lost almost twice as many to opioids, primarily fentanyl in this country. And, my single thought on this is, I don't know if Kyla would be alive if the border was closed, but I know that it wasn't, and she's not. So, these policies have consequences, and they're real. People are dying, not just from fentanyl, from crime, from lack of prosecution. Just had a case here where a guy, I believe, and I have to go look into it because somebody asked me to speak on it, in Antioch, Illinois, where because of something called the Safety Act, which was put in place by the state legislature, restricting the ability of police to do their job, restricting the ability of judges to sentence people to prison time awaiting trial, and eliminated cash bail. And it's funny, when I got out here, there were basically no gun laws as far as people going to jail, which was completely the opposite of what I experienced in New York, right? We ended up with a 1-year mandatory minimum, and then I think it got raised to 3 years, and I don't know where it is today. But when I tried to get legislation in Illinois to look at mandatory minimums for gun possession, the argument was, well, why are we going to restrict the judge's ability to make a decision as to whether or not this person needs to go to jail and make them put them in jail? So instead, what they did was they made it so that they can't put them in jail. So now they've restricted their ability to make that decision, but they argued the opposite same argument on this side when they wanted to use it then. And there was murder where the guy actually killed a woman, put her in a container, and kept her on his property for a while, and it was catch and release. And then he went out and committed another heinous crime, which I have to look into right now. But those are the things that these policies have consequences. Yeah. And I just don't understand what people are thinking about.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It really does not make sense. They worry about the wrong people, Gary. They worry about protecting the criminal.
If you fire a gun into a crowd, right? You're recklessly probably going to kill somebody. That's your mens rea. We know that as cops, right? In 2025, if you sell fentanyl, there is a 100% chance that you're going to kill somebody.
Yep.
100% chance that you're going to kill somebody. And, Tommy, it would blow up your caseload, but those overdoses shouldn't be handled
as murders,
as good overdoses that we've been since heroin junkies came around. Those are murders. because they're recklessly causing people to die or intentionally causing people to die if you're paranoid and think that there's a plot out there to get us.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I mean,
what is
Derek
the
calls
answer,
them
Gary?
poisonings.
How do we take the bigger chunk out of this that we possibly could?
Well, I think the first thing that we needed to do has already happened, which is closing the border, right? Because the amount of fentanyl that was coming through the border was enough to kill everybody in this country like 1,000 times over, if I understand it correctly. So I think that's the first thing. But the second thing is there has to be specific laws upgrading those. And it's not just fentanyl. There's other drugs out there that are just as dangerous. I just don't know what they are. I've never been involved in narcotics enforcement. It's just something I never did. But that has to be upgraded to make it just not worth it if you're going to sell narcotics, right? Sell weed, right? Or go to a dispensary and buy it. But selling fentanyl is just, it's poison. It's poison. You might as well sell rat poison to people and kill them.
Yeah.
And people have to be
Well, we're
accountable for
winding
that.
down here, Gary. Thanks for sharing that. I know that was a difficult conversation for you, but it really resonates with the audience, I'm sure, to realize that we're all been touched by this, some closer than others, obviously. But I think you said it earlier today when we were briefing. There's very few people, if any, that haven't had some level of touch of this crisis right now, for sure. So, but like in your case, way too close to home. So thanks for sharing and being willing to share that photo and tell Kyla's story. I'll go around the horn. Pete, I'll give you some final thoughts. We'll go to Gary and then we'll wrap it up. And I have some house cleaning to do, but any final thoughts before I do the
Well, first of all, Peter, you got to get me in touch with the DEA for yours. I'll get them on wearing a badge.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm going to close with this because, you know, I feel like I still have a lot to share with law enforcement. And I have, this came up out of nowhere. I didn't solicit this. I got a phone call back in April and they said, hey, we think you're the right guy to do this particular type of show, which is similar to what you guys want to do, is a couple of cops having a beer and exchanging war stories. And I'm the guardrails, which is a little scary, right, Tommy? Because you know me pretty well. But I get to say things that people are afraid to do. People are afraid to talk about race, but here's Corey Brooks and myself sitting down and talking about it. You know, people can't wrap their heads around what it's like to be the mother of a police officer killed in the line of duty, and to hear Carlos Yanez, her partner, who got shot 4 times. He lost an eye. He got shot in the face. He has trouble walking because of his brain damage from the bullet wounds. And on the show, he said, and I quote, "I'm glad this happened to me, not the officers who responded." And I sat forward, I looked at him, I said, "Carlos, do you realize what you just said?" And he said, "Yeah, I do realize what I said." And those are the people who give me hope, because I know they're out there. I know the nobility of police work, and that's pretty much what I close every show with. Is very few things that are more noble to do with one's life than be a police officer. Very few things. and I'm the eternal optimist, but we got to start getting these words out there because they're important. People have to hear this conversation about race with Corey Brooks. People have to know what's happening with fentanyl. It's just not resonating for some reason, even though everybody we know knows somebody. So that's my take. And thanks for having me. I can talk about this stuff.
Yeah, so Gary, I send everybody to the fox32chicago.com/tag/wearing the badge with hyphens, or you can just web search Garry McCarthy wearing the badge and you'll come right up. It's either on the YouTube streaming or it's on the Fox 32 website.
Yeah.
So get on that. What are days and times, Gary, or is it random?
It's random. We film on Tuesday nights, but we've got 8 shows I think are up and running now. We've got 4 in the can, and I've got a couple more planned by the end of August. Next one is going to take on consent decrees. That's going to be fun.
That will be fun.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, Peter J. Forselli, his book. You got that. The Deadly Path of Fast and Furious, Pete. If you want to just do that, give you a plug. This is your 4th episode. You didn't even try to plug your own book on your own show.
I'm a team player, Tommy. I'm not about me. Yeah, I blew the whistle on Operation Fast and Furious. It was a leadership decision. My agents were out there doing the right thing. Couldn't get their cases prosecuted. A new group stood up and did the wrong thing. And I tried to call them out on it. They didn't want to hear it. Then Brian Terry was killed and went to Congress, and the rest is history. So that's a true story. No names have been changed. And again, leadership matters. And I viewed that as a leadership decision. And Gary, you and I met a lifetime ago, man. Like I said, we're talking 1987, 1988. It's good to see you still out there leading and doing good things. So, and as for your daughter, man, I pray God's holding her close right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, we need more Garry McCarthy's, that's for sure. We don't really go after a lot of the people out there. There are a lot of names we could drop. It would be endless. It's not about that. This is about really supporting the cops who are out there. It's the best job in the world. I wouldn't change anything that I did, my involvement at all. I've met the best peoples. I bet you saw Sharon Sims. You've done this job. You have those people in your life. Most noble job in the world. Wouldn't change anything. Just looking for those leaders to take this over and get this train back on the tracks. So with that, I am going to wrap up with the Finest Unfiltered weekly show lineup. Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, 8:05. Finest Retired and Unfiltered. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1:05 p.m. Sal Greco show. And then on Wednesdays, Ron Lace and Rob Lukash, the Executive Perspective, Wednesdays, 5:05. So with that, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Any final thoughts? We'll go around the horn. Pete, one more time. Gary, one more time, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm good. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it.
God bless. Be safe.
All right, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you. Be safe.
Thanks.